Hello there and welcome to Luminar NEO All Sliders Explained, the show where we describe and explain you every single slider in this powerful photo editing application. Now, if you've never been here before, my name is Jakub and I'm a creator and founder of Clever Photographer. Now, before we going to start, I have a few things I want to cover. First of all, at the end of the video, we're going to give you our own and very popular Luminar NEO shortcut cheat sheet. So stay until the end so you can get your own copy. The second, if you want to follow us along, make sure you head into the description, follow the link there and get your sample files before we're going to start. If you don't own Luminar NEO, you can also follow the link in the description and use our own discount code Clever Photographer. That way you get additional 20% off and you can get your own copy. And finally, we want to ask you to like and comment on our videos and also follow our channel so we can keep creating content like this. In today's video tutorial, I'm going to introduce you to another powerful portrait editing tool here in Luminar NEO. Now, more specifically, we're going to be looking at the High Key tool. Now, talking about High Key tool, the High Key tool emulates the look achieved by high key lighting. It is where the main light source slightly overexposes the subject. This technique produces bright, high contrast images and is often used in a fashion and beauty photography. So we are back in Luminar NEO, we are in the edit module and we have our sample file ready. Now to find the High Key tool, we need to go into our tools, then portrait section, and it's the very last tool on the list. So we open it and as you can see there are several sliders and as always we will start by describing every single one of them. Now the first slider and the only one available to start with is the amount. The amount slider allows you to set the intensity of the high key effect. So let's start by pushing it and let's push it all the way and we're gonna start to see the effect on the actual image. Now, before we move to the rest of the editing, I want to remind you two things. Number one, when we're trying these sliders, please make sure that you really push them as far as you can to see the effect on the actual image. It's no point for you to go to 2, 3, 4 and not understanding what the slider does. So really push it so you can see and understand the effect. Number two, to reset any of the sliders, all you need to do is to double click on their name and they reset to the 0 or their original value. So let's bring it back to somewhere around 70 or 80 and that's the amount slider. Then the next slider on the list is called Standard High Key. Now this slider affects the image globally. So basically it applies the high key effect to the entire image. So by default it's on 50 and we can bring it all the way down. So by going to the left, we decrease the effect and by going towards right, we make the effect even stronger. So again, reset it by double clicking on its name. The next slider after that is called Dynamic High Key. So the Dynamic High Key is a little bit smarter as this slider is more limited in its effect, taking skin tones into account as it applies the high key effect to the image. So let's say we switch off the standard high key completely and now we just use the dynamic high key. So let's push it and you can see even when I go all the way to 100 that the result is so much more natural. Where when I bring this all the way down and push the standard high key, you can see that the image almost burns out. So let's reset it. Let's reset both of them. And this is where the dynamic high key is a little bit more gentle to the image. Now the last slider in this section is called Blacks. And the Blacks is used to maintain the contrast in the darkest areas of your image. So by default is on 40. And when we push it towards the left, you can see that the darker areas are getting much more darker and the contrast increase. When we push it towards the other side, the darker areas open up, the shadows as well, and we lose some of the contrast. So again, reset it by going into the blacks. After that, we're moving into the advanced settings. Here we have three sliders starting with the glow. Now the glow slider controls the behavior of the brighter areas of the photo. When we bring it all the way to the right, you can see how the bright areas, the background and the dress are getting brighter and they're getting additional glow. When we go the other way around, you can see how we eliminate some of the glow and some of the brightness. Again, reset it The next slider is called contrast. This slider affects the overall contrast in the image. Just as a reminder, when it comes to contrast, we have two types of contrast. The luminance contrast, that's the difference between the brightest and darkest parts of your image. And then also the color contrast, where there is a difference between red and white, and blue and yellow, and so on. So in this case, we're working with the luminance contrast. So when we bring the slider down towards the left, we're losing the contrast. When we push it the other way around, we're adding more contrast by making the brighter areas brighter and darker areas darker. Again, we can reset it by double-clicking on its name. And the third slider is called saturation. This slider determines if the overall image becomes washout or if it stays richly saturated. Let's have a look at it. When we push it towards the left, we lose the saturation and it really becomes heavily washed out. When we push it the other way around towards the right, we increase the saturation in most of the areas. So those were the sliders. Now you know how they work. So I think we should go back into the catalog and start to work on some other images. So we are in our catalog, and as you can see, we have 3 additional images we're going to be working on. Now this is a good time to give you a quick reminder about the possibility of following me along and do the edits on your own computer. All you need to do is to jump into the description, follow the link there, and download the files from our Dropbox account. Now to start with, we're going to be working on this image right here, so let's bring it into the edit module. From here, we're going to go back to our portrait section and open the high key tool. Now looking at the image, we have a lovely white background, so that will work very well for our high key effect. As always, we will start by switching and pushing the amount slider to get the overall effect on. As I was explaining you earlier, the standard high key get applied everywhere where the dynamic is looking after some of the skin tones and other colors. So personally, I prefer the dynamic high key. So if we bring down the standard and do a little switch, I think the effect is a little nicer. Now let's have a look at the blacks. When we push them down, we're getting the darker areas darker. However, I actually quite prefer when we keep some of the details in these areas. Then we move to our advanced settings, and this is where we can push some additional glow into image, which I think works very well here. We can also look at the contrast and see what works the best. In our case, probably somewhere around 50, just to keep it nice and natural. And finally, the saturation, let's see if we bring it down, we can make it really washed out. We can leave it the way it was and make it and keep it as a standard, or we can really push it and bring some colors back. In my case, I just reset it and leave it the way it is. Now I have an additional tip for you. Now looking at the picture, we're getting really nice bright background. However, by pushing the high key effect, we're losing lots of colors and details on the actual portrait of the model. So one way to rescue these details and colors is to go back to the essential tools, look at the landscape tools here, and use the Dehaze slider. Now let me show you. When I push the Dehaze slider, you will see how by pushing it, we're getting the colors and the skin tones back into the image. I think that is really cool. So this way we get the high key background, we have the high key on her clothes. However, her skin, face, hair, and everything remain nice and natural. So let me show you before the whole edit and after. And let me show you before we use the landscape tool and after. So it really depends which look you prefer. However, I think it's important for you to know that the Dehaze slider can really help with this effect. Now with the sample image number 2, I want to prove you that you don't always have to use the high key effect on a portrait image. So we're going to use this image, we're going to bring it into the edit module. And once again, we are in the portrait section and the high key tool. So we start as always by pushing the amount slider until we're happy with the result. Now we can go really crazy here and push the standard high key if we want to, or we can completely switch it off and push the dynamic high key. I probably prefer that. Then with the blacks, let's have a look at it. Open or close? I think quite close. I want to create quite strong contrast. And after that, I can move into the advanced setting and see what I like here. Add glow, probably. Contrast, I think a little bit. And then with the saturation, I would probably leave it the way it is, or if anything, I would go down a little bit. So once again, let's have a look at before and after. And you can see how really easy it is to create the very popular minimal bright effect by using the high key tool here in Luminar NEO. And to finish today's tutorial, I want to show you how we can use this high key tool on a black and white image. So we're going to use the fourth sample file and we're going to bring it back to our edit module. Before we go into our high key, we need to look at the essential tools and the black and white tool here. All we need to do here is just to click on convert to black and white. So don't worry about anything else. Let's just close this and we go back to our original high key tool. So from here, let's push the amount. And I'm already starting to like the result. Standard high key, yeah, probably dynamic, not much of a difference, but the blacks and the contrast is where we're gonna create the magic here. So let's push the blacks and create a really heavy contrast here. And then we go into the advanced settings and glow and see if that's gonna help, maybe a little bit. And then with the contrast, I think I wanna make quite strong contrast here. The saturation we don't have to worry about as it's black and white. However, I think the result is really, really cool. Let me show you before and after, how contrasty and how very vintage-like it's looking. I love the result. Now, we can do one more thing. We can jump into the edits. And in the edits, we can go back to our black and white tool. And let's zoom on the eyes. And now we can use our mask tool. On the actual black and white tool, we can use the eraser, and what we're gonna do, we actually gonna remove the black and white tool from her eyes. So we need to adjust the size, once again making sure that we are on the erase tool here, and let's just brush over her eyes. So let's do something like this, and maybe we are still too big and we need to zoom in a little further, so 200, and very carefully brush over her eyes. Now we clearly left some parts unchecked, so we need to make sure that we bring the black and white effect back to them. So here, and similarly here and here. So now let's zoom out and we go back to our high key edit. And I think the result is actually really, really cool. So you can be even more creative with the high key tool in the combination with the black and white tool. And I think the result is very, very powerful. Now, as always, before we're gonna finish, we need to wrap up and remind ourselves what we learned. So with the high key tool, you can introduce the bright, high contrast image look that is often used in fashion and beauty photography. From the sliders, what we learned today, we have the amount, which help us to apply the overall high key effect. Then we have the two high key sliders, the standard high key that gets applied to overall image, and the dynamic high key that applies the high key effect while looking at the skin tones and other colors. Then we have the black slider that helps us to maintain the contrast in the darker areas of our image. And then we have the whole set of advanced settings. We have a glow that helps us to control the behavior of the brighter areas of the photo. Then we have the contrast slider that affects the overall contrast in the image. And finally, we can look out and control the washout effect by using the saturation slider. You can have it completely washed out or very saturated. To top it off, we also learned that when we apply the high key effect, we can also go back into our essential tools and landscape tools and use the Dehaze slider to bring back some of the natural skin tones and other colors. So now it's time to get your own Luminar NEO shortcut cheat sheet. All you have to do is to head to our website cleverphotographer.com/luminargift and get it right now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you had fun and I hope you learned something new. Please don't forget to follow our channel and also check out our other videos covering Luminar NEO. For today, thank you very much for watching. My name was Jakub and I can't wait to see you in the next one.